Hi, I'm Maribel. On my wedding day, my parents didn't just abandon me, they handed my life to my twin sister like it was a gift she deserved more than me. They watched her take my fiancé and smiled. I was left in a torn dress, holding nothing but the silence they used to cover up years of betrayal. So I walked away, with no money, no family, no future, into the home of a dying man they once ruined. And the secret he gave me? It shattered everything I thought I knew. About them. About myself. Now they've lost everything. And suddenly, I'm the only door left to knock on. But tell me, after all they did, would you open it? Before we begin, let us know, what time is it where you are right now? And where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments below. This story's just getting started. The ocean was calm that morning, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The sound of the waves blended with the murmur of the guests behind me, and for a moment I tried to convince myself this was happiness, that the flutter in my chest was excitement, not dread. White roses lined the aisle, their scent sweet but heavy, like they already knew something I didn't. Eloise, my twin sister, stood beside me, fixing the hem of my dress with her perfect manicured fingers. She looked radiant, hair swept up, lips painted a bold shade that drew every eye. She smiled, but it wasn't soft. It was the kind of smile that carried ownership. People whispered, "She looks more like the bride than her sister." I heard them. Everyone did. I tried to laugh it off, whispering to her, "Guess they forgot who's wearing the veil." She didn't look up. Well, maybe they just see what fits better. Her words landed like a quiet slap. I looked away before she could see the sting. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that. Eloise always had a way of twisting affection into competition. The ceremony was supposed to start 15 minutes ago. Dorian hadn't come out yet. I stood there waiting, surrounded by people, but feeling completely alone. My parents were in the front row, or at least they had been. When I looked again, the seats were empty. A chill crept up my arms. "Where did my parents go?" I asked one of the ushers. He hesitated, glancing toward the west wing of the chapel. "I think they went that way, ma'am." Something in his voice made my stomach turn. I gathered the folds of my gown and walked, barefoot now because the heels were pinching, down the marble corridor. The music from the ceremony faded behind me, replaced by the faint hum of air conditioning and my own heartbeat. I turned the corner and froze. There they were, my parents, my sister, and Dorian, my fiancé. His hand was wrapped around hers, their faces inches apart. My mother was smiling. My father's expression was stone, like this was just another business deal. "Maribel," my mother said softly, as if catching me in a daydream. "We were just talking." Eloise turned to me, her expression calm, rehearsed. "You weren't supposed to find out this way." My throat went dry. "Find out what?" Dorian stepped forward, guilt flickering across his face for half a second before disappearing behind pride. "Eloise and we didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. You deserve someone who really loves you, Maribel." I stared at him, then at my mother, hoping for denial, for someone to say this was a cruel misunderstanding, but my mother just sighed. "Sweetheart, this is for the best. Eloise is stronger. You've always been delicate. You'll understand one day." My father nodded, adding almost mechanically, "It's better this way." Something inside me cracked, not loudly, but quietly, like ice splitting beneath still water. My bouquet slipped from my hand, hitting the marble floor with a dull thud. Petals scattered across the white tiles. Nobody moved to pick them up. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I just stood there, looking at the three of them, my family, my future, dissolving like salt in rain. My voice came out steady, detached. "You planned this." Eloise bit her lip. "Not planned, exactly." But it makes sense, doesn't it? I turned toward my father. Does it make sense to you? He sighed, bored, like he'd been through this speech before. You've always been too soft, Maribel. Eloise knows what she wants. That's what this family needs, someone who can take charge. A few guests had followed me, standing awkwardly in the hallway. None of them said a word. No one stopped it. I looked at their faces, some pity, some discomfort, but mostly they just didn't want to get involved. My hands were trembling again. The walls felt closer, the air thicker. I stepped back slowly, then turned away. I hope you both get everything you deserve, I whispered. As I walked out of the chapel, the first drops of rain touched my skin. My dress clung to my legs, heavy with water and shame. I could still hear the murmurs behind me, shoes scraping the floor, whispers about what a tragedy it was, what a scandal. I kept walking. The sky opened up and the rain came harder. I slipped off the veil and let it fall into a puddle. The wind carried the sound of the ocean again, steady, endless. My thoughts were silent, but my heart screamed. That day, I learned something I'd never forget. Silence can sound louder than betrayal. That silence became the only thing I had left, until the phone call that changed everything. For 3 days, I stayed at a rundown roadside motel on the edge of town. The kind of place where the paint flakes off the walls like old skin, and the buzzing neon sign outside hums louder than the television. I didn't unpack much, just a change of clothes and the envelope of cash I'd hidden away back when I still thought I'd have a honeymoon. The bed creaked every time I moved. The air conditioner rattled like it was on its last breath. I didn't mind. After everything, I welcomed the noise. It reminded me I hadn't gone completely numb. I spent most of my time lying on that lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling. I replayed the wedding over and over. Not the vows, because there were none. Not the walk down the aisle, because it never happened. But the moment in the West Wing hallway, Eloise's hand in Dorian's, my mother's eyes filled with pride, and the way my father said, "You've always been too soft." People think heartbreak is noise, shouting, crying, slamming doors. But it's silence that kills you slowly, the kind that echoes through you even in a crowded room. On the 4th morning, I walked across the parking lot barefoot to get a soda from the vending machine. The sun was already baking the asphalt, and the machine gave me the wrong drink. I didn't bother fixing it. I just sat on the curb, sipping something I didn't ask for, trying not to feel anything at all. That's when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, area code from Charleston. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Ms. Quinn?" The voice was calm, professional. "This is Elise from Comfort Care Placement Services. You applied with us 2 years ago, correct?" I blinked, caught off guard. I did, yes, but I never heard back." "Well, we have a position available now, live-in caretaker for a private client, Mr. Silas Ward. He's recovering from a severe stroke, nonverbal but conscious, needs full-time assistance." She paused. "The pay is quite generous and housing is included. Room, board, everything." I rubbed my forehead. "Why me? I haven't been active with your agency in a long time." There was a pause, then a soft clicking of keys in the background. "Mr. Ward requested you specifically. Said he saw your photo in our applicant database and insisted." My stomach tightened. "I've never met him." "I understand," she said, her voice lowering just enough to suggest curiosity. "But his instructions were very clear. If you're available, the address is 426 Bay Ridge Lane, just outside Charleston. Someone will be there to receive you." I didn't know what to say. I hung up without committing. Back in the motel room, I stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked like someone I'd passed on the street and never noticed. Tired eyes, hair, tied back in a way that said, "Don't look at me." I touched my cheek, felt the weight of everything. And then I started packing. By late afternoon, I was on the road. The drive to Charleston took hours, mostly through stretches of nothing, fields, trees, clouds that seemed to follow me. I arrived just as the rain started again. It felt like the same rain from the chapel, like the sky hadn't stopped crying, just waited until I showed up. The Ward estate sat like a ghost at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by towering oak trees. Their branches draped in moss, like the house itself was being kept in mourning. The driveway curved around a neglected fountain, and as I parked my car, the wind carried the scent of sea salt and wet stone. An older woman opened the front door before I could knock. She wore a navy sweater and black slacks, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun. "You must be Maribel." "Yes," I said, tucking my wet hair behind my ear. "I'm Ruthie," she replied with a faint smile. "I manage the household. Come in before you drown." Inside, the house was dim, cool, and strangely quiet. The walls were lined with bookshelves, old paintings, and clocks that had all stopped ticking. I followed her down a long hallway. "Mr. Ward doesn't talk much anymore," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "But he watches everything." That sentence sat with me. I wasn't sure if it was meant as a warning or an invitation. The guest room was simple: bed, dresser, window with heavy curtains. A far cry from a bridal suite, but I didn't care. I dropped my bags and followed Ruthie to the study, where Silas Ward spent most of his time. He was in a large leather chair by the window, his body still except for his eyes. They followed me the moment I stepped in. His face was thin, pale, his jaw sharp. A blanket covered his legs. An oxygen tank hissed softly beside him. I approached slowly, unsure if I should speak first. "Mr. Ward, I'm Maribel Quinn. I'll be staying to help you." He didn't respond, just watched. Not coldly, but not warmly either, like he was waiting to see if I'd measure up. The room smelled faintly of cedar and something older, like forgotten paper. I noticed a photo frame on his desk, turned face down. Something about it made me pause. I reached toward it, instinct more than intention. My fingers grazed the edge. And his hand moved, fast, firm. He gripped my wrist with a strength I didn't expect. I gasped, startled, looking into his eyes. There was something sharp in them, something alive. He opened his mouth and rasped one word: "Quinn." Then he let go. His head dropped slightly, and the silence returned. I didn't know what to do. My heart pounded, not in fear, but recognition. How did he know my name? I stared at him, frozen. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't random. I came here to disappear, but someone already knew exactly who I was. I didn't sleep that night. After Silas whispered my last name, something shifted in the air between us. Something I couldn't name yet, but it clung to me long after I left his room. I lay in bed with the covers up to my chest, staring at the ceiling, playing every second of that moment back in my mind. His hand gripping mine, the rasp of my name like it had been buried under dust for years. By morning, the fog outside had lifted, but the heaviness inside me remained. The days started to take shape in a quiet rhythm. Mornings were slow, tea on the veranda, the sound of birds waking up along the coast. I'd walk the stone path beside the garden, checking in on Silas before breakfast. He never spoke again after that night, but his eyes always followed me. Not in a way that felt invasive, just observant, like he was studying something he'd long forgotten. Ruthie was kind but distant. She cooked for the both of us, kept the house spotless, and only spoke when needed. But every now and then, she'd offer a glimpse into who Silas had once been. "Built half this city, you know," she said one afternoon while dusting the bookshelves in the parlor. "Real estate, development, deals no one else could pull off. People called him the Quiet Lion. Then one day, silence. I folded laundry at the table, glancing toward Silas's study down the hall. What happened? She paused, her hand resting on an old volume. Some say betrayal, others say he just trusted the wrong people. The phrase hung in the room like a whisper behind a door. I didn't ask more. 3 days in, Ruthie asked if I could help sort through old documents in the den. Silas's legal papers, investments, a few handwritten letters he'd kept from decades ago. I didn't mind. I liked the distraction. It kept my hands busy while my mind wandered too close to memories I wasn't ready to hold. I opened a worn leather folder stuffed with papers. Most were dull, tax returns, property assessments, but near the bottom I found a sealed envelope with yellowing edges. The handwriting on the front was neat and precise. To Carver Holt. My heart skipped. That was my father's name. I glanced down the hall, listening for footsteps. Nothing. I slid the letter out. It was dated 25 years ago. The first page was formal, a thank you note from Silas to my father. Gratitude for helping save the company during its darkest hour. Words like loyalty, partnership, trust. But a second sheet was folded behind it. This one wasn't typed. The ink was smudged, the handwriting rushed. It started with, "I should have known." Silas had written that my father took control of a rehabilitation trust set up after Silas suffered a spinal injury, money meant for long-term care. And instead of managing it, my father siphoned the funds. Quietly, legally. Ruthless in the way only people who know your vulnerabilities can be. "I trusted you," it read. "You didn't just take my money. You took my voice." I sat back, the paper trembling in my hands. So this was the man my parents destroyed, and I was living under his roof. I stared at the ceiling, as if it might offer answers. But the silence that filled the room wasn't peaceful. It was the weight of buried truths finally surfacing. Later that afternoon, I returned to the study. Silas sat in the same spot, his eyes fixed on the rain sliding down the window. I looked at the photo frame still turned face down on his desk. Ruthie walked in behind me, her voice low. "He kept that photo like that since the day your father walked away." I turned to her. "Why didn't he throw it out?" He said erasing things didn't make them untrue, just easier to ignore. When she left, I stood for a while, then reached for the frame. My fingers hesitated before flipping it over. There they were, Silas, my mother, and my father. Standing in front of a construction site, all smiles. Silas looked strong, confident. My father shook his hand with a polished grin, and my mother, she was pregnant, heavily. I stepped closer. Her dress clung to her belly, unmistakable in its roundness. That was me and Eloise. We were already there. He knew us before we were even born. I couldn't breathe for a moment, not out of fear, but out of the strange, awful clarity that sometimes only comes in stillness. Everything I'd believed about my family, about what we'd earned, who we were, began to fall apart in that instant. They hadn't just turned on Silas. They'd climbed over him to build the life I'd been born into. That night, I couldn't keep still. I paced the hallway until the house quieted completely. Then I made my way back to Silas's room. He was awake, though the lights were low. I stepped into the doorway and held the photo in both hands. "What did my parents do to you?" I asked. He didn't respond. His eyes glistened, fixed on mine. A tear rolled down his cheek, slowly, silently. He didn't wipe it away, and I knew. Whatever had been taken from him, it hadn't just been money or power. It was something deeper, something no one had ever tried to give back. He hadn't said anything else after that night, but I felt it. Something between us had cracked open, and once it did, it couldn't be closed again. I started to feel his gaze more than ever. Wherever I moved in the house, pouring tea, folding laundry, reading beside the window, I'd glance up and find his eyes following me. not in suspicion. It was softer than that, like a man waiting for a puzzle piece to fall into place. The staff grew quieter too. Nurses who once greeted me with polite smiles now passed by with quick glances and murmurs. One evening, I caught two of them whispering in the hall outside the kitchen. "She's the one Mr. Ward asked for?" one said, just low enough to sting. "He hasn't trusted anyone in over a decade, and now he brings in her?" I pretended I didn't hear, but the words settled somewhere I couldn't shake. That night, Ruthie brought my tea to the study instead of the veranda. Her face was tight, the kind of expression people wear when they're deciding whether to tell the truth or protect you from it. She set the tray down, then sat across from me. "You know why you're here, don't you?" I stirred the honey into my cup, careful not to look up. "I got the call from the agency. He needed a caregiver. That's it." She sighed. "He lost everything after that deal with your father. The wheelchair, the house. It all came after." I stopped stirring. "When your family got rich," she said slowly, "he ended up here, alone, paralyzed and angry. Not loud-voiced angry. The kind that simmers, the kind that builds over years." I set the spoon down. "Then last year," she continued, "he saw a photo of your parents on one of those society sites, with you and your sister. You were at some gala. I remember the headline, 'The Quinn Twins, Legacy in Motion.' He called the agency that day, said he wanted you, only you." I felt my stomach twist. "So I'm not here by chance," I murmured. "No," she said plainly. "You're here because he chose you." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. For the rest of the day, I walked through the mansion like it wasn't mine to walk through. I couldn't stop wondering whether I was being punished or tested. But that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat with Silas by his fireplace. The only light came from the crackling logs and the moonlight streaking through the windows. He didn't look at me at first, just stared at the flames. "If this is some kind of retribution," I whispered, "I won't run from it. But I'm not my father. I never asked for any of this." He blinked. Just once. Slow and deliberate. "And if you brought me here for closure," I added, "then tell me what it is you want from me." There was no answer, but for the first time, I didn't feel unwelcome. Over the next few days, I made a decision. If I was going to stay, I would do it on my terms. I read to him every afternoon, not just headlines or medical updates, but poems, essays, novels he might have once loved. I talked about my mother's sharp voice and how it could slice through a room, about how my sister always smelled like lavender but left wreckage wherever she went. Silas never spoke, but some nights I caught the corner of his mouth twitch. Other days, he'd close his eyes like he was listening harder than anyone ever had. One evening, I stepped into his study to tidy up and found a legal folder left open on his desk. It wasn't like him to leave anything out. Usually Ruthie or I handled the paperwork, but this was deliberate. Inside was a draft of a will. I skimmed it once, thinking it must have been old, but the date was recent, less than a month ago. Then I saw it, my name, Maribel Quinn, not buried in the fine print, but listed as the executor, the one entrusted to carry out his final wishes. I stood frozen in place. Executor. It wasn't just symbolic, it meant he trusted me to protect his legacy, his assets, his choices, after he was gone. I backed away from the desk like it had bitten me. It didn't make sense. I was the daughter of the man who betrayed him. I was the twin sister of the woman who stole from others with a smile. I was the girl left barefoot in the rain on her own wedding day. Why me? Later that night, I found the bouquet. The one I dropped at the chapel, dried now but unmistakable. Someone had placed it in a narrow vase beside Silas's bed. The petals were curled, brittle, the color faded to a soft cream, but it was still mine. I touched it gently. Maybe Ruthie had picked it up that day. Maybe she'd held onto it, not knowing why. Or maybe Silas had asked her to. Something inside me broke open again. Not from pain this time, but from the strange possibility of grace. That same night, just before midnight, I returned to his room. The lights were low. I adjusted his blanket, checked the humidifier, and turned to leave. Then I heard it, rough, slow, like gravel being pushed uphill. "Your parents?" he said. I turned around. He stared at me, his voice shaking. "Took my future." I stepped closer, heart pounding. "But I see my legacy. In you." I didn't cry, not then. I just stood there, feeling the weight of every mistake that wasn't mine. And yet, somehow, was now mine to carry. I didn't move from that spot for a long while. The fire had dimmed to embers. The bouquet sat quietly in the vase like it belonged here more than I ever had. And Silas, silent again, stared into nothing. But something between us had shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a reckoning had begun. The following days passed slowly, heavy with expectation. I woke earlier, walked longer, spoke less. Even Ruthie kept her distance, glancing at me like she knew something was coming, but didn't want to be the one to say it aloud. And then, it came. 2 weeks after Silas whispered those words, I heard the sound of gravel crunching outside. It was still early, the sky barely light, rain dancing softly against the windows. I stood at the second-floor landing, heart already beating too fast. Through the glass, I saw the car door open. First came my mother, Helena, dressed like she was heading to an awards banquet. Perfectly tailored ivory coat, sunglasses perched high despite the rain. Next was my father, Carver, all stiff jaw and practiced smile, like a politician pretending to be a father. Then Eloise, and Dorian. Her hand was looped through his arm, her chin tilted up like she owned the place. His face unreadable, but he didn't pull away. They looked like a family I once belonged to. But from where I stood, all I saw were ghosts wrapped in silk and secrets. By the time I reached the front hallway, Ruthie had opened the door. My mother stepped inside as if it were her house. "Darling," she said, her voice the same syrupy mix of warmth and warning she'd always used. "We were so worried. You just disappeared." I kept my voice steady. "You mean I walked away from a wedding that wasn't mine?" Behind her, Eloise chuckled under her breath. My father stepped forward, brushing water from his blazer. "We're here on business. Silas and I, we have history. There are some things that need settling." "You came to negotiate," I said flatly. "We came," he replied, "because Silas owes us." I almost laughed. Owes them, the man who'd lost everything because of their deal. My mother was already scanning the room, as if mentally measuring the value of each item she saw. "We heard you've been working here," she said, drawing out the word like it was something dirty. "Caretaking. That's admirable." I didn't flinch. Someone had to be decent. Her face tightened. And then came what they really wanted. "We understand," my father began, "that Silas may be considering some adjustments to his estate. We wanted to ensure things stay fair. To everyone involved." There it was. So this wasn't concern or reconciliation. It was about money, about legacy, about control. They weren't here because they missed me. They were here because they smelled inheritance. Before I could speak, I heard the soft, unmistakable hum of the elevator from the East Wing. Silas. He entered the room slowly, Ruthie, guiding his chair but giving him space. His eyes swept across the room and landed on my father, and something in them burned. Carver straightened, recovering quickly. "Silas," he said with a smooth smile. "Old friend, you look, well." Silas didn't blink. You took everything from me. The silence that followed was colder than the rain outside. My mother shifted, uncomfortable. Eloise let out a short, nervous breath. Dorian said nothing, just watched me. Then Silas pressed a button on the intercom by his armrest. "Call Mr. Gentry," he rasped. "Tell him to finalize the documents today. The estate transfers immediately. My heir is Maribel Quinn." I heard my name before I could process what it meant. Eloise dropped her purse. It hit the floor with a loud, hollow sound. My mother went pale, lips parting but no words coming out. My father's jaw clenched so tightly it looked like his teeth would snap. "No," he said quietly. "You can't be serious." "She's not capable," my mother added, voice rising. "She's fragile. She's soft." I turned toward her slowly. "Maybe, but I'm not a thief." Dorian looked down at the floor. Silas didn't say another word. He didn't need to. I felt the weight of the moment pressing into my skin, but I held my ground. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink in their presence. I noticed the bouquet reflected in the glass of the hallway window behind them, warped, distant, but still there, like a ghost of the girl I was the day they left me behind. As they turned to go, my father brushed past me. He leaned in, his voice low, his breath cold near my cheek. "You think this will last?" he hissed. "Money never stays with the weak." He pulled back before I could answer, but I didn't have to, because deep down, I finally knew. I wasn't the weak one. But that didn't mean I felt safe. The house had fallen into a stillness that night, the kind of quiet that doesn't calm you. It watches you. Rain slipped down the glass panels of the solarium roof, each drop tapping like cautious footsteps overhead. The thunder stayed far off, low and rumbling, as though even the storm was holding its breath. I stayed in the hallway longer than I meant to, pretending I was just listening for the wind. But the truth was, I didn't want to go upstairs. Not yet. Something in the air had changed, and I could feel it pressing against my ribs. From the far end of the house, faint voices stirred. I moved quietly down the staircase, barefoot, each step creaking like it might betray me. As I reached the bottom landing, I paused. There, muffled behind the parlor doors, I heard them. My parents. They were still here. Every sound in that house felt like a secret trying to breathe. Ruthie found me not long after. Her face was pale, lips pressed thin. "Don't go in there," she whispered, glancing back over her shoulder. "Something's wrong. I checked the study an hour ago, and the safe. It's been tampered with." My stomach dropped. "What was in it?" "The will. The new one," she said, barely above a whisper. "And your power of attorney papers." My legs carried me faster than my thoughts. I rushed to Silas's study, the door slightly ajar. The light was still on. The safe sat open, empty. I spun around, breath caught in my throat. Footsteps behind me, too slow to be Ruthie's. Helena. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed like she'd been waiting. "Looking for something?" she asked, tilting her head. I didn't answer. My eyes scanned the room again, hoping, praying I was wrong. But I wasn't. She stepped forward, calm and polished, like she was hosting brunch instead of breaking and entering. "You shouldn't be poking around," she added smoothly. "This house holds a lot of sensitive things." "You read it," I said, voice flat. "You read the will." She blinked, smiling softly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You mentioned the clause about the charitable foundation being dissolved. That's not public yet. Only someone who read the draft would know." That perfect smile wavered, just enough. I stepped closer. "This is your doing. You sent Eloise to play distraction. You brought Dorian to stir guilt. And Dad, he's here to dig through whatever's left." Her eyes narrowed. "You always were dramatic." "No," I said. "I was quiet. That's not the same." Her expression shifted. The mask was cracking. "You think you're better than us now?" she said, suddenly sharp. "Because a dying man decided to rewrite his legacy with your name? He's the only one in this house who's treated me like I mattered." She laughed once, bitter and clipped. "You don't know what it's like to hold a family together, to fight for their future. Sometimes we have to hurt one to save the rest." Her words hung in the air like smoke. "You mean Silas," I said. "You hurt him." She didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped closer. "That deal saved everything. Your school, the house you grew up in, the clothes on your back. You think those things just happen? We bought your life, Maribel, and someone had to pay for it. So you sold his future to buy mine." Helena's eyes turned cold. "And I'd do it again." I didn't answer. I couldn't, not with words. My body moved before my brain caught up, turning away, back through the study, up the stairs. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It had steadied, focused, because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. In my bedroom, the air was thick, the windows fogged. The bouquet still sat near the fireplace, dried now, brittle. A single petal detached and fluttered to the floor as I passed. I stared at it a long time. Then I reached into the drawer by my bed and pulled out the small black USB Silas had handed me days ago. "Keep it close," he'd told me, "just in case." I didn't know what was on it, not yet. But tonight, everything changed. Morning came with a false peace. Sunlight spilled across the floor of the study, warm and golden, softening the storm-stained windows. The rain had stopped. The sky was unnaturally clear, almost too blue for what had just happened. Birds were chirping again, as if nothing inside these walls had cracked the night before. But I knew better. That kind of silence? It wasn't peace. It was the kind that shows up after damage has been done, like calm water hiding a current strong enough to pull you under. I was already dressed. I hadn't really slept. I made coffee, took 2 sips, then set it aside. My hands were already shaking. I sat at Silas's oak desk, the same desk I'd polished, organized, and now practically lived at. The USB he gave me lay in the center like a question waiting for an answer. I plugged it in. The screen blinked, then opened a single folder. 1 video file, no name, no date. Just watch me. My finger hovered over the mouse for a beat. Then I clicked. The image flickered, grainy at first. Silas, 20, maybe even 30 years younger, sat alone in a room I didn't recognize. The lighting was harsh, almost clinical. He didn't smile. He didn't blink much either. His voice, though, it was sharp, clear, still full of fire. "My name is Silas Ward. If you're watching this, then I'm likely gone, or close enough that the truth can finally matter." I leaned in. He spoke about Carver Quinn like he'd once trusted him, like there'd been respect once, maybe even friendship. But it had been shattered long ago. Silas explained everything, how Carver had siphoned money through a fake investment deal, rerouted company funds into shell businesses, then bribed a medical board to cover up a surgery error that left him in the chair. Every word hit harder than the last. He wasn't just betrayed, he was silenced. And now, years later, he was using me to speak for him. The video ended with his face, still and weathered. If you're seeing this, then justice is no longer a matter of law. It's a matter of legacy. I sat back, closed the laptop slowly. My reflection hovered in the black screen, overlapping his. He didn't just choose me, he prepared me. That's when I noticed it. Another folder on the USB, hidden behind the video. Inside were documents. Dozens of them. Balance sheets, wire transfer records, names I recognized from family dinners and holiday parties, now listed in offshore accounts, shell companies, fake addresses, and Dorian. His name appeared too many times. His company, merged with Eloise's lifestyle brand, was the funnel for most of it. My father's empire was just a prettier version of organized theft. Everything they ever bragged about, every sacrifice they said they made for us, was built on someone else's ruin. I should have been shaking, but I wasn't. I'd cried enough. Now I just moved. I made copies, encrypted the entire folder, and sent it to the only person Silas ever mentioned with admiration, his former attorney, Charles Benton. I found his contact in Silas's files. No message, no explanation, just the evidence. If this was going to burn, I wasn't going down with it. Later that morning, I stepped into Silas's room. He was awake. His eyes found me instantly. He didn't speak, but something in them looked different, like peace. "You remind me," he whispered, voice hoarse, "of the woman I should have been brave enough to marry." I smiled, moved closer, took his hand. It was cold but not weak. "And you remind me," I said, "who I need to become." He closed his eyes. In the fireplace, the bouquet sat in its vase, just as Ruthie had placed it. The flowers were crumbling now, stems brittle, colors faded into brown and gray. I picked it up, no words, just moved to the hearth, placed it in the flames, and watched it catch. The petals curled quickly, folding into themselves, the way pain sometimes does when it finally lets go. The smoke rose and drifted through the air like something released. That bouquet had seen too much. It was time to let it go. As I stood there, watching it turn to ash, a sudden flicker caught the corner of my eye. Headlights. Someone had pulled up the drive. I stepped closer to the window. 2 black SUVs. Not the usual car. They were back. And this time, they weren't coming to talk. I stood motionless near the study window, the reflection of those 2 black SUVs trembling in the glass beside my face. A strange calm settled over me, like the pause before a match hits gasoline. By the time the sun dipped low behind the marshes, the entire estate seemed to brace itself. I walked the halls, straightening frames, brushing dust from mantel edges, checking on Silas, who, despite his pallor, had insisted we have dinner together as one final show. His words, not mine. "They'll think they're in control," he whispered, as Ruthie tucked a blanket across his lap. "Let them." The dining room gleamed, silverware polished until it sparkled like ice. Candles flickered down the length of the long table. Everything was staged, deliberate. I took my seat just before they entered. My parents, dressed in charcoal and steel gray, moved as if they still owned the world. Eloise glided in behind them, one hand looped around Dorian's arm, like he was still hers to flaunt. He couldn't even look at me. Their smiles were well rehearsed, their footsteps silent over the wood floors. "Maribel," Helena said sweetly, taking the seat directly across from me. "We thought it was time to heal." I didn't reply. I just poured water into a crystal glass. Ruthie leaned down behind me and murmured under her breath, "They're not here to talk, honey. They came to erase." Dinner began with hollow compliments. The roast was succulent, the wine rich, the house well kept. Their voices were too smooth, every word stretched over something sharp. Carver cleared his throat. "Silas, I must say, you're looking—" "Save it," Silas rasped, cutting him off with a flick of his fingers. "We're not here to flatter." The air chilled a few degrees. Carver reached for the wine like it was armor. Then it began. A subtle vibration beneath the table. Silas's signal. I glanced down at my phone. A live call was already connected. Attorney Charles Benton was listening in, recording. I folded my napkin in my lap and sat straighter. "You came for the money," I said plainly. "But let's talk about how you earned it." Helena lifted her glass, eyes narrowed. "We came to make amends. You came because you knew Silas was rewriting everything. And for once, your power didn't buy silence." She tilted her head. "Darling." You always told me to speak like a lady, I interrupted. Tonight, I'm speaking like a witness. Eloise let out a sharp breath and slammed her hand on the table, silverware clinking loudly. You're destroying our family. I looked at her, calm and clear. No, I'm freeing it from the lie you built. Dorian shifted beside her but still wouldn't meet my eyes. Then Silas reached for a folder Ruthie placed beside him. With trembling fingers, he pulled out a document, his will, the final version. Without breaking eye contact, with Carver, he signed it. The sound of the pen scratching paper echoed through the room like thunder. The attorney's voice came clearly through the speaker now, no longer hidden. This confirms Mr. Ward's legal testament, witnessed live, signed in sound body and mind. Carver surged from his seat, face flushed, voice rising. This is a setup, fraud. Charles's voice was steady. The estate assets have already transferred, legally sealed, irreversible. Everything stopped. Eloise's mouth opened, but no sound came. Dorian finally looked at me and saw I wasn't the same woman who once waited for him at the altar. Helena blinked. Once, twice. Her hand trembled, just slightly as she set her wine down. Behind them, above the mantel, the place where our family portrait used to hang now held only the ashes of the bouquet. A single glass shard from the fallen frame glinted in the candlelight. Then Silas coughed, violently. I rushed to his side. He gripped my wrist, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen. It's done, he whispered. They can't hurt anyone else. His chest rose, then fell. And for a moment, I wasn't sure if he would take another breath. Ruthie was already dialing 911. Within minutes, the paramedics arrived. Their presence broke the trance. Everyone stood back. As they wheeled Silas out, Helena called after me, voice quieter now, uncertain. Maribel! I turned to face them one last time. You buried me once at that wedding, I said, voice steady. I learned to live without you. Now, you'll learn to live without power. No one followed me when I stepped outside. The night air was cool, salted by the sea. The sirens faded into the distance, but the silence that remained felt louder than any storm that had come before. That night, I sat alone in the living room of my small coastal home, windows cracked open to let the salt air drift through. The quiet wasn't suffocating anymore. It felt earned, like something I'd been chasing without knowing it. 2 months had passed, 2 long, strange, peaceful months. No more marble floors, no sweeping staircases or silk curtains, just hardwood creaking under my bare feet, a chipped teacup by the sink, and a white rose in a mason jar on the table. I used to think healing meant forgetting. I found myself whispering once, staring out at the horizon. Now I know it's remembering without pain. I kept to myself, took walks along the shore each morning, waved at neighbors I hadn't yet learned the names of, and mailed letters from the tiny post office down the hill. Life had softened. Or maybe I had. I didn't read the headlines when they first came out, about Quinn Enterprises folding under scandal, about Carver's frozen assets, Helena's estate being sold off to cover legal bills, Dorian's personal issues making gossip columns in cities far from here. But eventually they found their way to me. Whispers at the grocery store. A folded newspaper left by a cafe customer. A local church group passing around updates like scripture. Eloise and Dorian, done. Apparently, he found falsified bank records in her files. Accounts hidden in places no one was meant to look. He packed up in the middle of the night. Carver, last I heard, was under federal investigation. Helena had moved from her country club mansion to a 2-bedroom rental by the freeway, and I didn't feel joy or triumph, just stillness. Revenge felt smaller than I imagined, I journaled one night. Justice, though, that was enough. The days blurred together in that gentle rhythm. Until one evening, near dusk, came a sound I hadn't heard since I arrived. A knock on the door. I paused, hand halfway to the kettle, and waited. Maybe it was a neighbor. A delivery. But the second knock was softer, hesitant. Like whoever stood out there wasn't sure they should be. When I opened it, the breath caught in my chest. Eloise. Her hair, usually perfect, was pulled back with a rubber band. Her blouse clung to her like she'd been walking through humidity. In her hands was a worn leather purse, clutched tightly. She looked smaller than I remembered. "We have nowhere to go," she said, voice thin. "Mom's sick. Dad, he's gone." The words hung in the doorway like fog. I didn't ask questions. I didn't demand answers. I stepped aside and let her in. She moved slowly, her eyes scanning the space like it didn't belong to someone she used to know. "Tea?" I asked, already reaching for the kettle. She nodded, collapsing onto the couch like her body had finally admitted it was tired. I poured the water into the same chipped cup I'd once used sitting beside Silas's bed. That cup had seen grief and grace. I placed it in her hands and sat across from her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said it, not like a weapon, but like a wound. "Why didn't you hate me?" My hands stayed folded in my lap. I looked straight at her. "Because hate would have made me just like you," I said gently. "And he didn't save me for that." Eloise broke, shoulders shaking, hands trembling around the cup. For the first time in my life, I saw my sister not as the girl who stole everything, but as the woman who never had peace. I didn't forgive her, not yet. But I didn't need to. That wasn't the point anymore. The white rose on my kitchen table caught my eye. It wasn't from a florist. I'd planted it weeks ago in a pot on the porch. The first blooms surprised me this morning, delicate, alive, and completely mine. That night, once Eloise had fallen asleep on the couch, tears dried, blanket pulled to her chin. I stepped outside with the urn cradled in my arms. The moon hung low over the sea. The waves met the shore like a lullaby. I walked down the path, my bare feet brushing the dew-covered grass, until I reached the edge where the ocean waited. Silas had given me more than an inheritance. He gave me permission to start again, to believe that even broken things can bloom again. I opened the urn and let the ashes catch the breeze. "He gave me everything," I whispered, but what I truly inherited was courage. The wind carried him out to sea, soft and slow. I stood there long after, breathing in the salt and silence. Sometimes the family you lose is the one that frees you. And sometimes silence isn't the end. It's the beginning of your own voice. That day, I walked away barefoot in the rain. Tonight, I walk home. And the ground finally feels steady beneath me.